Hello and welcome to Lit Illuminated. This is a space for us to talk about books, the way they connect us to ourselves and our story, and the way that it helps us connect to the world around us. So today I'm going to talk to you about Magnus Magnusson. Oh, if you're on YouTube, you just saw my little hamster bookmark move. Magnus Magnusson's Scotland, The Story of a Nation. I have not finished this book. I'm getting through it, and so it's a different podcast in the sense that I haven't completed the book. I picked this up last year when we were going to Scotland, and for me, Scotland was a bit of a returning. I was there in the early '90s, and so this was a moment for me to come back to a space that I had already lived in. But I like to pick up books that are about the place I'm going to, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and like read it while I'm there. And that was originally my plan when I picked this up. Someone had posted on Instagram, and I was like, oh great, I'm gonna pick that up and take it with me to Scotland. Got it, 700 pages or so, and I was like, oh no, I am not carrying that in my carry-on and trying to lug that around Scotland as I'm traveling. But I've been reading it ever since. Slow going. I have lots of other books that I'm reading, but it's a deep, thorough history of Scotland, and I'm loving it. And today I was reading the chapter on William Wallace, and I got towards the end of it, the very end of the chapter, and this is where I started to see the patterns and the connections. And so I wanted to just share that with you because I think it resonates with what I've been talking about on this podcast about how stories, become a space for us to understand ourselves and the world around us. So this is the end of the chapter, and he's talking about how King Edward didn't want to create a martyr of William Wallace, but essentially that's what he did by the brutality of how he ended his life. And so the quote here is, these stories were part of what we can call a people story because the people wanted to cling to his, William Wallace, memory. And the way of doing that was through personal local remembrance in areas in which Wallace had operated. And it goes on to talk about how we have then like Wallace stones and Wallace trees and Wallace wells and, and everything in that space. Then he continued to say the Irish have a word for this concept, dinnshenchas, hope I'm saying that right, the telling and the constant retelling of stories around places, and the stories reinforce the identification of these geographical features. And in the margin, I immediately wrote Hau'ofa. And if you've been following me at all, you know that I talk about Epeli Hau'ofa a lot. And the book I'm referring to is We Are Oceans by Epeli Hau'ofa. And if you are on YouTube right now, you will see that my book automatically opens to this page. I didn't even have to go look for it because I have returned to this concept many times. And the quote in Epeli Hau'ofa, this is in the chapter called Past to Remember. The quote is, our landscapes and seascapes are thus cultural as well as physical. We cannot read our histories without knowing how to read our landscapes and seascapes. When we realize this, we should be able to understand why our languages locate the past as ahead or in front of us. And he continues, it is right there on our landscapes in front of our very eyes. And the story goes on to say, like when you're traveling along and someone points out like, oh, hey, by that tree is where my cousin kissed a girl or whatever. And you look around and you look at that tree and automatically you're building the story in your mind. You're seeing the story in your mind of what you've just been told. You're placing that story on the landscape. And that's also what was happening here with Wallace, right? The people of Scotland wanted to remember him, and so they looked to the landscape to make the connection to say, this is where he was. This is the space where he did X, and so therefore we're going to mark it. We're going to name it with his name, and it's also going to be a place to tell our stories around that, and those stories get passed down and passed down and passed down through the generations. So the place then takes on the story itself. And I was also just finished I just finished reading Richard Shaw's book, The Forgotten Coast, and I finished that this weekend when I started coming back to Scotland. And the very interesting about that is that this book, I believe I may have talked about this on the podcast when I talked about my Aotearoa bookshelf. I picked this up when we were last home, and I was reading his second book, Unsettled, but this is his first book, which is a memoir about his family's experience in their lives in Taranaki. And at the end of this, he has this quote that then connected me to something else. So I'm just going to read that. So this is the last chapter, Ending the Forgetting. And he states, "Towards what end then? I think the answer lies in John Newton's reflections on the process of becoming Pākehā. I like the use of becoming rather than the more common being, because that clarifies that you need to figure out what it means to be of and from a colonial settler family, particularly one implicated in the things described in these pages." So his idea of really leaning in on this becoming rather than being was another connection to me. And so he's obviously very connected to place. He's talking about in this space, and it's this, how do you be of a place but not of a place, and how do you understand what that means when you think about becoming instead of being. And then that made me think of my own book that I have, The Unfurling Frond, a memoir of belonging and becoming, because that was part of that whole process as well that I was wrestling with. And so this was this ping, 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 ping connection. You would be like, how did you go from William Wallace in Scotland to Epeli Hau'ofa to the coast in Aotearoa to your own memoir from Bellingham, Washington? Like, how is this all connected? And I think it's that deep rootedness of place, and how place holds our story, and how that story gets so rooted into place. Our own story gets rooted into place. And then the story of the history of the place gets rooted into place. Like, it's this layering, this constant layering of not only land and sea, but of story and of family story, of cultural lore. That story is so super connected to place that we don't often take the time to really sit with that and to recognize how much place is the story. So that was my little insight that I wanted to share with you today. I know it's a little untraditional that I'm not going through a whole book. Hopefully I will finish Scotland, the book by Magnus Magnusson, and be able to share that with you later as I slowly work through it now. I think I'll just be coming to you with these little insights that come to me. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining me here on Lit Illuminated.